Okay, and we're live.
We are.
Hi, I just want to say thank you all for coming out and joining us at court for this discussion about queer issues for the mayor of St. Louis. Today we have special guests Tashara Jones and Kara Spencer, and they're joining us as they race for the mayor of the city of St. Louis. I want to thank you both for coming out. I know that you have both been great advocates for queer issues in the past, and it is a testament saying that you're here. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And you know, as we're here on Martin Luther King Day, I just kind of wanted to note that there are many queer influences of Martin Luther King, such as Bayard Rustin, who was the one who helped with the I Have a Dream speech, and who's the one who helped plan the march on in August, the Million Man March. And so when we look at the influences of Black liberation, there's always been queer and trans people there. And so today on Martin Luther King Day, we want to continue that dream and make sure that queer and trans people don't get left out of the conversation of Black liberation. So I want to thank you, and I'm ready to dive deep. You guys ready?
Sure.
Cool. And so one thing that we want to point out is that we use the term queer, and queer is just an all-encompassing term that some use to denote anyone of a sexual or gender minority. It is interchangeable with LGBTQIA+, just a lot less syllables. So both of you have currently held the office that you're in for several years. In what specific ways have you used this position to benefit the livelihood of queer citizens?
Which one do you want to go first?
Let's have you go first and just alternate who goes first.
Okay. Well, Maxie, thank you for having me this evening for a really important conversation about the lives and the livelihood of the LGBTQ plus community in St. Louis. As treasurer, I started the Office of Financial Empowerment because I believe that it's important for us to help people make better choices with their money. And so we take our classes out in the community, rec centers, churches, where 2 or 3 are gathered. We try to show up and partner with financial institutions, realizing that, in my opinion, nothing changes your life more than God or love or a 100-point increase in your credit score, because your credit score determines how much you pay for everything and how you move through life. And so we have services and products that we partner with our financial institutions that are there to help people, again, make better choices with their finances. And also, as out of my treasurer's role, I participated every year in the Pride Fest, which is my favorite time of the year. But the last one, I stood up and actually decided not to because of the controversy that surrounded it. And I felt like queer, especially Black trans lives, were not respected in the mayor's decision not to, or to allow police officers to be in the parade. So those are a couple of ways in which I have supported the community as an ally.
Thank you. And Kara?
Thanks, Maxie. Thanks for inviting me here tonight. I guess I first start out by just saying that I consider myself a friend and an ally to the queer community. And as an ally, my first job as an elected official representing a very diverse group of constituents is to be present. And so as an alderman in my current role, which I've served now for about 5.5 years, almost 6 years, the first thing I do is show up and am present when invited to conversations like this. I've come to several of yours over the years, Maxie, and been an honor to do so. But as an alderman, my job is also to be a policymaker. So one of the things that I am proud to have been a part of in my service in that role is to be a co-sponsor of our city municipal law, which bans the use of conversion therapy and protecting our queer youth from having to be exposed to that horrible and awful therapy, or I can't even call it therapy, but that abuse. And so those supporting our department of, HR department, and they're just continue to use to consider domestic partners in our benefits and other things like that. So again, I think the first real responsibility that we have as policymakers is to be present and to lean in and to listen.
Thank you. We're looking for what specifically would your administration do to achieve higher recognition of trans and intersex identities? And would you support the changing of St. Louis official gender markers to be more inclusive of these gender identities?
I think we'll start.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, the question really is, what would my administration do to break down barriers and potentially, I'm sorry, it was kind of cut out for me just for a second.
No problem. The question was essentially asking about city gender marker recognition and increasing the city's governmental capacity to support and validate the identities of intersex and non-binary people.
Sure. I think that this is an excellent idea. I know many countries have adopted and recognized non-binary, their gender classifications. I think it's something the city should look into. I know we have an enormous amount of work to do as a city, but I am proud that we do come out, when looking at the human rights campaign, that we are scored well. That does not mean that we don't have a lot of work to do. But I do think that we have a very strong queer community that would, I think, rally behind doing just that, breaking down the gender roles here. And so I think that as mayor, I'd be happy to do, it'd be an honor to do that, honestly. So, but I'd have to lean into the queer community and be led by the queer community and what we as a city need to be doing to break down those barriers and make sure that we are a more equal city for everyone.
Thank you, Kara. And you, Tashara?
Yes, so as mayor, I would promote the creation of a municipal ID program with inclusive gender markers like many other cities around the country, and work to end dead naming and misgendering in city record collection. So when you're applying for a job, you're able to use whatever gender marker that is appropriate as you apply. And then we also have to work harder to end discrimination and make sure that we have a welcoming environment. So, and that also is, taking a look at who's not at the table when we're making decisions. That also means promoting a commission to look at, all of our city policies and procedures and how that intersects with the queer plus community. I don't think that we've done a great job at being good partners with our queer plus community, and I want to make sure that I can change that.
Thank you. Now, last year, the state of Missouri introduced more anti-queer legislation than any other state, more anti-queer legislation than any other year. This being a clear indicator of the rise of anti-queer rhetoric within the state legislative body, only reflecting the deeply ingrained homophobia and transphobia in the state. Many anti-discrimination laws only protect queer and trans citizens in a few counties, St. Louis City and St. Louis County being among these. How would your role set the standard across the state, and how would you call upon other leaders to do the same?
Well, great. So as a former member of the legislature and a former assistant minority floor leader, I proudly co-sponsored MONA every year that I was in the House, and also worked when I was in leadership to try to see if we could get it at least heard in committee, because sponsoring is one thing, but actually using your leadership to push issues is another. And since there are very few cities across the state that do this, I think it's incumbent upon whoever is mayor to work with our outstate legislators. Me being a former member of the body, I have existing relationships in the House and the Senate, and can use those to leverage a more or better relationships with the Queer Plus community, and as well as our Queer Plus advocacy in Jefferson City.
Thank you. Kara?
Sure. While the city scores well in the human rights campaign, the state of Missouri is backward in almost every way. But the city of St. Louis, the St. Louis region is an economic driver for the state of Missouri. And we need to advocate on behalf of our residents and the values that the city of St. Louis has in the state legislature. We have unfortunately not done a very good job of doing that on many issues, and representing well the concerns and the issues that are facing our queer community is one of those areas that we have failed to represent our residents here in St. Louis before Jefferson City. So if elected as mayor, I will establish a very strong presence in Jefferson City, something we haven't done. I'll lean into my experience having been an advocate for consumers against corporate profits, as serving as the executive director of a nonprofit, advocating in Jefferson City over the last several years, and use the relationships I've built there to help normalize and destigmatize the queer community in Jefferson City. It continues to be a problem and is nothing short of disgraceful that in 2021, we have to educate our state legislature, but that is absolutely an issue here in St. Louis, and I would be an ally in that fight.
Wonderful, thank you. Now, it is no secret that I've been quite critical of the current mayor of the city of St. Louis. And I have had conversations with many people in city government about how can we move forward. How would your mayorships differentiate themselves from the current administration?
Well, as you know, I launched my campaign well before COVID hit, but certainly well before our current mayor decided to step down, because I disagreed with the approach to many things. The first of which really is, and perhaps the most important, is really leaning in to issues with, or in people and organizations with whom we don't necessarily always agree. We have such a diverse community in St. Louis, a diverse set of ideas and a diverse set of really values. You know, we have a huge disconnect between our police department and our community as a whole. Leaning into those disagreements and helping to set the table so we can find common ground and start to work together as a unified community once again. I think, you know, where we have really failed to engage with communities that don't look like us, that has been a real problem in the mayor's office and in city government as in a general rule. Nationally, we have a very distrust of government structures as well. We should, you know, looking at what's happened in our state and in our capital, you know, over the last few weeks, the last several years, that makes a lot of sense. But here locally, we have got to, at first and foremost, have trust at the center of all of our actions, building trust and reaching out to communities with whom we may not always agree.
Thank you.
So I think that, you know, we have to go a little bit further. And as I said in my last answer, we need to establish a commission for queer plus issues because, you know, the people who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And I can't be a good ally if I don't have you at the table to let me know what I'm doing correctly and also where I need improvement. And there's no better way to do that than through direct conversation and in my opinion, an established commission to take a look at things within our city, our public safety system, how it fails the queer plus community, how we don't address our unhoused population. I think that we have to have the queer plus community at the table when making important decisions because the decisions that we make at the local level affect everyone, and especially we don't want to make a decision that may adversely affect those in the queer plus community. So I want you at the table, and we'll make sure that we provide a seat at the table for you.
Thank you. And I just want to comment to everyone that's watching at home in the Twitch comments, we are reading them. Yes. And if you have any questions, please bring them up, and Amy Jade will be asking those later. So if you have any questions in the comments, make sure you keep active in the thread. We love it. I'm reading it all, and you guys are very out there.
Yeah, I was just going to say at the end of the regular questions will be follow-up questions and questions from the chat. So if you have your questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. I'll be collecting all of them.
They're going ham in the chat.
I know, right?
So we at Qu'art are strong advocates of reallocation of funds from the police and redistributing these funds to the services that combat crime at the root. Both of you have said several times before that you support this in some manner. I would like to know what this reallocations of funds would look like under your mayorship.
That's a great, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, I was just saying we're starting with you.
Thank you. That's a great question. And yes, this is all about deploying the right professional to the right type of call. We already know that almost 50% of calls that come into 911 can be answered by someone other than police. So that means either making a new department within the police department, or alongside of it that has trained professionals to answer calls that don't require a police response. And I've been advocating for this since the first time I ran in 2017 to put social workers in the police department. The Cops and Clinicians program is scheduled to start next month. I'll be looking at that closely as it continues, and want to look at ways to improve it should I be elected mayor.
You may have seen I issued a 10-point crime plan last week that includes the reorganization and prioritization of many of our public safety allocations. The first of which is when people call in an emergency situation, we have got to pick up the phone and be responsive. That is not currently happening. Over 25% of those calls are being answered by a recording when people are experiencing real emergencies. To address that, as the treasurer pointed out, the Cops and Clinicians program is a phenomenal one that's going to be going into place. If elected mayor, I'll be expanding that and implementing not just a redirection of some of those, but a 311 program. This is something many major cities have in place to allow residents an easy way to solicit non-emergency services from their city. It's an easy to remember phone number, and it makes that process a lot easier. I will also be hiring social workers to be stationed in our police departments. Often we do rely currently on our police for emergency situations, but we do not always need a person with a gun to respond. And so having those resources there will facilitate that and take some of the burden off. One of the other issues that I would be putting in place is a problem landlord unit to really help make sure that our housing is safe for all residents, and we are going after the bad actors who are renting uninhabitable places to our most vulnerable residents.
Thank you.
Amy, do you mind if I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
And I'm so sorry I missed this on the front end. Is this when we have just a few seconds left, or is that when time is actually up?
No, this is for 30 seconds left, sorry.
Excellent. Okay, thank you.
So I know you mentioned this before, but we're going to just revisit it. What will you specifically do to protect and support queer youth?
As I mentioned on the front end, protecting our queer youth is so important, and that's why I was a proud co-sponsor of the bill led by Alderwoman Ingracia in 2019 to ban conversion therapy. And through that process, really learns about some other issues that are really impacting our queer youth. We have got to make sure, first and foremost, that everybody that is experiencing homelessness, we know homelessness is a major factor in our queer youth community. We do not have housing that really is specific to that population. And so we have as mayor, I will prioritize ensuring that anybody experiencing homelessness, especially on an emergency basis, will be able to be housed immediately and safely in a way that is protective of their identity. We have also got to address some of the other disparities that more impact our queer youth community. And that looks like providing access to healthcare and providing access to mental health care and providing access to those experiencing addiction, especially during an emergency situation. So I'll be supporting the implementation of a sobering house to make sure that we have access during emergency situations to be able to come down and in a safe manner when necessary.
That's a great question. There are our queer youth, excuse me, our queer youth encounter a whole host of issues and things that I can't even begin to understand. So I'm going to go to be totally honest and vulnerable here and say, you know, I don't understand, but I'm willing to listen. And that's part of leadership, being able to listen and being able to be at the table and listen. So just like I talked about a commission for queer plus issues, I think we also have to have a commission for our queer youth to make sure that they know that someone in government is listening to them, listening to their needs and trying to respond accordingly.
Thank you. And I like how both of you have stated that there are issues about queerness that you aren't fully comprehensive of. And that is like a step of allyship to know, hey, this isn't something that is in my lane to give like any answer, or like I don't have the authority of this. And so I appreciate that. It brings us to this next topic of allyship. So when we think about allyship, it's actively combating oppression in our professional lives and our personal lives. How are you actively combating oppression in your personal life, and how will this transition into your administration?
As a Black woman, I combat oppression every day, every time I step outside the door, because every day that I wake up, I'm reminded that you know, I have two strikes against me. I'm Black and I'm a woman, and sometimes three, given the situation of being a single mother. And so I've known no other existence but to combat oppression in all shapes and forms, especially, you know, in my involvement in the Black Lives Matter movement, in my involvement in my sorority, Delta Sigma Theta, and I made a choice to go to a historically Black college, Hampton University, because I wanted to be around people like me and soak in that excellence of being on a Black campus. So, but all of those experiences teach me how to recognize it, and also have taught me over the years of how to fight it. And you don't always fight it with words. Sometimes you fight it with policy. Sometimes you fight it with advocacy. And sometimes you're able to fight it with money by, you know, hitting them in the pocket where it hurts. So those are the ways that I will definitely try to fight oppression, or continue to fight oppression as I transition to the mayor's office.
So as a white woman, you know, I can say that I don't know the extent of oppression that many people in our community experience. I am a single mom, and, you know, as evidenced by the, you know, sometimes you have issues that come up, but I don't know the full extent of oppression that many people experience. As I mentioned on the front end, I think the most important thing that any leader can do is to be present and to listen. And I'm glad and honored to be here tonight, to join Tashara here tonight, because it means that the two women in this race are allies in the fight here with you. And I think we both have a track record of showing up and listening and digging in and leaning in for answers and for guidance on how to better serve our queer community. You know, you call this a debate, Maxie, but I'm viewing this as a conversation where I can listen to issues and hear the concerns as much as share what I will do as if elected as mayor. So I think continuing to lean in and be present is it's really one of the most important things that any ally can do.
I appreciate that. And, you know, I've said it before, but I think it is a huge testament to the fact that the two women are apart, and the fact that the two straight men decided to take a couple months to decide that they weren't going to show up. And, you know, as queer liberation is moving forward, it is harder for queer people to build up that political power, because people are like, oh, you're just a drag queen. Oh, you're just a sex worker. Oh, you're just, you know, a lesbian that is vocal. And so, like, when we are fighting for queer liberation, we definitely need as much allies as possible to get through this. So when we look at privileges, can you describe your own personal privileges that you experience and the intersectional oppression that you face, and how this will affect your decisions as mayor?
Sure, I can. As a white woman, I have an enormous amount of privileges just by being white. You know, I have the privilege of having a great education underneath me. I have the privilege of having gone to college. And while I worked my way as the first member of my family to get a degree, you know, I had my basic needs met. You know, I had access to a job flipping burgers to pay my bills. This is not something that many people have. And recognizing that it is not and it is not even an option to have a high quality education for many of our children's youth, to live in a violence-free household, to live in a neighborhood that, while we have challenges, I feel relatively safe getting out of my car and walking into my home most nights. Of course, and there are issues here, but recognizing that this is not a privilege that many, I would even argue most of our residents, certainly most of our youth, have in the city. And this is a real problem. But I can say that experiencing and living with that privilege makes me want even more to and understand the other, that we have got to provide that for everyone. And it is unacceptable that we have many children living in poverty and without access to their basic needs being met, especially in a country as wealthy as the United States, and as a city with the amount of resources that our city truly has.
I'm going to share something with you and be vulnerable for a moment if I can. This is the first time in my adult life where I've only had one job when I became treasurer. Before that, I was used to working at least 2 jobs to make ends meet for me and my son. And while I do recognize that as a privilege, only having one job, a lot of people do not, or a lot of people are used to working more than one job. And a lot of time, and I've done that most of my adult life. And I realize that now that that's a privilege, but I'm not too far out. And I still have to sometimes help my family when they need money or, you know, help or whatever. And people in my community are a paycheck away from poverty and a paycheck away from being homeless. And again, like I said before, the people closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And I have been in a situation where I've had to, you know, really pinch my pennies to make ends meet, and really watch my spending. I filed bankruptcy when I was in my early 20s because my mother died and my father was in jail. So these experiences, all of these experiences, I'll bring to the mayor's office, because I have a lot of experiences of a lot of people in our city, and I'm able to relate to the things that they're going through, either because I've been there or I'm trying to help provide them resources so they don't have to make the same mistakes I did or go through the same things I did.
Thank you. And now we're looking at kind of employment. So many trans and non-binary people have an exponentially difficult time finding traditional work, even with anti-discrimination laws in place. This results in a high percentage of queer folk relying on non-traditional work to make ends meet or even thrive. Among this non-traditional work, many people within the queer community find themselves as sex workers. There has been a national cry to decriminalize sex work from Kim Gardner, Kamala Harris, Cori Bush, and many others have pledged to this support. Can we count on your support to decriminalize sex work, and what specifically would you do to ameliorate the livelihood of sex workers?
Yes, so there was an article recently in the Post-Dispatch that highlighted this part of my platform, because sex work is work. And I want to work with the city councilor and city attorneys to decriminalize it and keep up the work that Kim Gardner's been doing. Because as you stated in your question, cis and transgender women are far more likely to be arrested than their male counterparts. And so we have to recognize that and make sure that we decriminalize it, so cis and trans women don't end up in jail for work or for trying to make ends meet.
Well, we know that the criminalization of sex work isn't doing any good for anyone, most especially those who are employed in this way. I mean, this is a legitimate way of making ends meet and making money and earning a living. So, I think that first and foremost, to support Kim Gardner's decision not to prosecute those engaged, but we have to go further than making it reliant upon who's in the prosecuting attorney's office by ensuring that our police department is not using resources to criminalize this line of work. I think one of the gaps I don't fully understand is what is actually being applied. If we have state laws that need to be addressed, or if they are local municipal ordinances, but certainly as mayor, we can direct our police department to not engage in harassing women who are engaged in this line of work, and making sure that we are communicating on a regular basis with the sex worker community to better understand what is actually happening, regardless of policies or laws that are in place. And so if elected mayor, I'm committed to addressing this, certainly the violence associated with it, the harassment that's associated with it, and breaking down the confusion around it, and helping to better educate people, for example, between the difference between sex work and sex trafficking, so we can start to address the stigma associated with it as well.
Thank you. And for all of you that are at home that want to catch up on sex work decriminalization and the movement within the state of Missouri, I recommend you going to check out Moho Justice. They are an advocacy organization focused on sex work liberation. Continuation with sex work. COVID had an impact on many businesses. And a lot of those businesses were strip clubs, which were being forced to shut down in East St. Louis. Would you support the legalization of strip clubs within the city of St. Louis?
Would I support the legalization of strip clubs in St. Louis? Maxie, I don't know the answer to that right now. I haven't thought about that with regards to what that looks like, but I certainly would be open to the idea and the conversation. I will freely admit I have patronized strip clubs, and so I'm no stranger to them. And so this would be an issue I would certainly be willing to look into.
I believe that's already been preempted by the state. So strip clubs aren't allowed in the state of Missouri.
This is true. There is a lot of convolution with the law, and talking to some legislators, some have stated that it can be a city thing in which it could be passed.
Well, given our relationship with the Missouri legislature, anytime we do one thing, they usually preempt us and pass a law that restricts us from doing that. However, I'm open to working with the legislature to see where the boundaries lie. Again, using my previous relationships there to see if that's even an option, because it's work. And I'm not going to judge anyone for if that's their line of work.
Well, thank you. And this question is about substance abuse. So while the public health challenges of COVID-19 and bullet-related injuries have ravaged St. Louis, no issue has impacted the lives of our community as substance abuse. There is currently a woeful lack for support for people who use drugs. Substance use has been identified as the top health concern of the LGBTQIA community. What actionable plan do you have to promote the health and well-being of people who use drugs?
So one of the things I want to do when I close the workhouse is use the money that we save to invest in mental health and substance abuse services, which we do a horrible job of delivering those services in the city of St. Louis. And then also, I think we also have to look at what are the avenues to help people who are addicted to get off of that addiction. And we only have one that I know of, methadone clinic that provides drugs to help people get off of or deal with their addictions. So how do we use that, as well as the expansion of medical marijuana to help people with their addictions to different substances? And then also I want to point out that an article I read in the paper about, about heroin addiction. And African Americans their overdoses have increased by leaps and bounds when it comes to heroin addiction in the city of St. Louis, and we haven't paid attention to that either. So not only would we have take a look at that as it affects the queer plus community, but also the African American community as well.
Yeah, this is absolutely an issue that has a disproportionate impact on our most vulnerable communities. As an alderman, while we don't have nearly enough services, I have spearheaded the support of several coming into the 20th Ward. So for example, BASIC, the Black Alcohol Drug Service Information Center located on South Grand, moved from the Central Corridor to the 20th Ward in part because of my staunch support of the work they do. And I, bucked the neighborhood organization in making sure that they could not only obtain the permits that they needed here, but had a warm welcome and continue to. Missouri Network of Opiate Reform and Recovery, Chad Sabora, down here on South Broadway, is another example of a service that has my unwavering support as the alderman and as a resident of that neighborhood where it's located because of the services they provide. I would, as mayor, divest of the workhouse, much like Treasurer Jones, and invest in a sobering center, a resource that can divert folks experiencing drug addiction and emergency level drug addiction and help them receive access to the care they need. As alderman, as a policymaker, I also put in place this first municipal legislation called the Good Samaritan Bill in the nation. We became the first city to do that, which provides for anybody calling 911 for somebody experiencing an emergency level drug overdose to be immune to drug charges during that time. That led to the state of Missouri taking that on, but I'm immensely proud of protecting those experiencing those emergency level overdoses in that manner or locally.
Thank you. Some people in the chat have asked the question if any of you would support safe injection sites. Such programs have been implemented in San Francisco and other cities.
Absolutely, yes.
Yes. Oops, sorry, Tashara, go ahead, Treasurer Jones.
It was a yes or no question. Yeah, yes, go ahead.
Yes, last year I drafted with the guidance and help of Chad Sabor of Mo Network, a bill that would decriminalize needles so that we could actually give them away for free. And that was an issue that Chad brought to me as an ally in the fight against drug addiction and the destigmatization of drug addiction in our community so that we can give use the distribution of needles as an access point to help bring people in to provide them the tools they need to address addiction if that was something they were ready to do at that time. But unfortunately, that is an issue that is preempted by the state of Missouri, and our current health director was not, we had some disagreement. I do, however, think there are some creative workarounds to doing that, and declassification of that as paraphernalia so that we can find a way to actually distribute them and provide space municipally to be able to do that. So I think I misunderstood that question as being kind of going back and forth rather than the yes or no answers. Wasn't my intention.
No, sorry, I totally understand. It was just like a yes or no answer, but I appreciate the longer answer.
Yeah, we just appreciate your support, really, both of you, to be real. So the role of the LGBT liaison in previous mayoral administrations has been minimalized or non-existent. What would the role of the LGBT liaison play in your administration?
And we'll start with Kara for this
one. So yeah, I mean, I think one issue I was going to point out earlier, I failed to do so, was to, the current mayor did have a liaison. And of course, that person did not stick around very long. And when they left, it wasn't replaced, which was, I think, an enormous omission. I think, as mayor, I would appoint somebody to that position that is a member of the community and would consistently bring that voice into the cabinet so that there is a consistent presence of the queer community within all the decisions that are made in the mayor's cabinet. And that would help to frame the work that we're doing with that equity lens at the forefront of all of the decision-making in the mayor's office.
I'm gonna maybe go a little bit off topic or off the beaten path when it comes to a LGBT liaison. I think that title alone is somewhat of an insult to the community. I would rather appoint someone who represents the community to a high-powered position within the mayor's office, and then have them be involved in all of the decisions at a high level, rather than just issues related to the LGBT plus community. I think that person could be that, you're a part of the administration, so you're a part of all of the decisions that are made, plus whatever your function is in the office. So I would just make sure that in my hiring decisions that I'm inclusive and make sure that, again, that those who are not at the table are represented, as well as having a queer plus commission, not only for adults, but also to address youth issues in the queer plus community.
Thank you. So the current mayor said on a Facebook Live in regard to the unhoused panhandlers, if you stop giving to them, they'll just go away. This is reflective of the general attitude of several generations of mayorship in the city of St. Louis. Queer and trans people are at an exponentially higher rate of being subjected to housing stability. With this fact being stated, how would your mayorship regulate and monitor shelters and transitional housing that enforce exclusionary, transphobic policies?
I think that it's fair to say that if you're being discriminatory, then you don't deserve to do business in the city of St. Louis, period. And if we find that any shelters for the unhoused are discriminating against people for whatever reason, but especially, because of queer plus issues, then we need to hold those organizations accountable, or shut them down, or find a new operator who's going to be inclusive.
Currently, the city of St. Louis is the gatekeeper of the federal funds that we receive as a community to address homelessness, and we are not currently putting much additional funding into that. If I'm elected mayor, the first thing really is to lean into the community that's serving our unhoused population, to empower those organizations to help distribute those funds, with the charges in effect that we have to have housing available for every type of person that could possibly experience homelessness in our community. But to have that directed exclusively by the city of St. Louis is problematic, I think, in several ways. Those who are really engaged in providing those services, are sort of at the mercy of the city of St. Louis. And really, it should be the other way around. We are reliant upon those who are working with our unhoused, and we should empower those organizations to better distribute those funds. But at the forefront, anybody who's receiving any type of funds, federal, especially tax dollar funds, should absolutely be held to a standard of non-discrimination on any level at all times.
Thank you. And that is all the questions that I have before our closing questions. So Amy, if you have any questions from the comment section that you would like to read? Or
yeah, I have a few follow-up questions and then some questions from the chat. The first question I'd like to direct towards Tashara. At the top of the hour, you talked about financial institutions that you have partnered with in order to help people be able to make better choices with their money. Do you mind identifying some of those financial institutions that you've worked with?
Yes, so there's a list on the city's website at stltreasurer.org of all of the banks that the city is approved to do business with. We have a approval process every year that used to only consider their mortgage lending rates, the mortgage lending within the city. And so I expanded that application to include a whole host of more data points, like where they're located, what their workforce diversity looks like, how many ATMs they have, what other programs do they have to help people buy homes, what their small business lending looks like as well, and also their recent CRA reports. So a few of those institutions that are licensed to do business or approved are Bank of America, First Bank, PNC, Commerce Bank, Royal, First Financial Federal Credit Union, Midwest Bank Center, Simmons Bank, and there are about 3 or 4 more. It's about 13 total, but those are the ones that come to mind.
Mm-hmm. Okay, because it is important to note that some of these banks do provide campaign contributions to many different types of politicians across the state and across the country, some who have supported rather homophobic legislation. Just for those who are watching, that kind of a thing. A follow-up for both of you talking about establishing new departments within the police department in order to better their relationship to the city of St. Louis. Would that require increasing funds to be sent to the police department, a department that already is the dominant receiver of city tax dollars?
I don't think it requires increase in the budget at all. I would work within the current budget because right now there are over 130 openings. And as we read in the recent Teneo report, some jobs in the police department can be done by civilian employees instead of police or licensed police officers. So I think we can look within the current budget to make sure that we can reallocate the funds towards investing in things that make people safe in their homes and in their neighborhoods.
And Kara?
I agree entirely. The report the treasurer mentioned, the Teneo report, also pointed out that we have so many redundancies in the police department. There's a restructuring that needs to take place, and some of these things will not cost money. The fact that we do not have a communication strategy for communicating with our general public is not something that would cost us any money. It is a policy we need to put in place that our existing officers need to use. But reorganizing our police department in a more efficient way will help free up officers to be more community oriented and spend time in the communities they're policing, because you're absolutely right that the lack of trust between our police department and our community is an enormous problem on so many levels. with failing to address this and failing to root a public safety policy in trust will only result in a continuation of extremely high crime rates and will not move us forward as a community.
My next follow-up question is directed to you, Kara. During your conversation about, or during your answer in regards to queer youth, you talked about safe housing and providing access to sobering housing. Can you talk more about those programs that you're interested in, and how would you increase access to safe housing in the city of St. Louis?
Increasing access to safe housing is something I've been working on as an alderman. This issue specifically related to our queer youth is incredibly important, as I know from personal experience, having to try and find housing for queer youth at any hour is incredibly difficult to do under our current system. So first and foremost, providing additional housing. I work with many of the providers of unhoused to build housing within successful neighborhoods, those neighborhoods that are growing, like the ones I represent. Weaving them into our neighborhoods so they are most successful is a key component to making sure that addressing the needs of our unhoused is successful, both for those experiencing homelessness and our community at large. But the sobering house in particular is a concept that the Missouri Foundation for Health and other advocates have been pushing for. You know, if we can divert folks experiencing a drug overdose or even a drug toxicity level from having to be incarcerated, which is currently the case often now, officers will pick somebody up who's experiencing a drug overdose, and they have either an option of taking them to an emergency room or to a detox tank, which is not a healthy place to be. So a sobering house will provide a place to get sober, essentially, and that will not only be a safer place, but one that will have access to what resources we do have for folks who want to maybe change their life. Without that, those other options are not only extremely costly to our city and our hospital system and our city government, but they are counterproductive to those experiencing drug addiction. So leaning into our hospital system to help fund that by diverting funds that would otherwise go into the ER and then into our criminal justice budget by diverting, again, funds that would otherwise be used to incarcerate people that are simply experiencing a medical emergency level overdose or drug situation.
Okay. My next follow-up question, both of you had different answers in regarding the relationship you would have with a liaison or community representation within your administration. Both of your answers beg a level of, or beg a question of how will there be community accountability for the person that you put in either your administration or in the role of liaison? And we can start with Tashara, this one.
So how will there be community accountability for the person or people? I believe there should be more than one that I put in my administration. You know, again, you know, because I sit from a place where I have experienced oppression directly, I feel like I am also in a place to be able to hold people accountable when they oppress others. So holding people accountable, that'll come directly from me. And, you know, making sure that, again, every time I sit down at a table, I look around and see who's not there. And I want to make sure that, that I'm being inclusive as I can with bringing the right voices to the table to represent the communities that make up this great city that we all live in. And so holding people accountable, the buck stops with me. To hold people accountable for not having the right people at the table, or not making an inclusive table that includes everyone, because you should be able to succeed here regardless of who you love. And I want to make sure that this city is welcoming for everyone.
As just like an added question onto that, would you be willing to support any effort from a community group within St. Louis that would say that one of your administration representatives of a subsection of a community, would you be willing to have town halls or some other type of meeting where they could ask you to recall that individual as representation of them?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You know, because as an example, we have other affinity groups that hold the mayor, or try to attempt to hold the mayor accountable for grievances that they have with her current office. So I think the queer plus community should be no different. You'll always have a space at the table to call me if I'm doing things right or if I'm doing things wrong. I'm accountable to you and to everyone.
And Kara, the role of liaison, how would the community be able to hold the liaison accountable? How would they be able to ensure that their representation in the form of liaison would be proper and well regarded within the community?
Sure. Accountability and trust are incredibly important components to government, something that is sorely missing in all levels currently of the government that we as citizens rely on. So in this role, just appointing somebody is not necessarily enough to have the voice of the queer community represented in any capacity. And so I would have to lean in entirely to the queer community to ensure that that person, whomever they might be, is able to represent well the interest of this incredibly diverse queer community that we have in St. Louis. So I think to be not only holding town halls, but be willing to always come before a group when invited to hear concerns that are or are not being addressed by that person who would be a cabinet level appointee to make sure that that perspective is at least a part of the important decision making at every level in the mayor's office. But it would require a real lean in to the queer community to provide that feedback on a regular basis.
One of the questions coming from chats and messages, a lot of them kind of revolve around this idea of accountability. For example, holding our police and our corrections officers accountable for the mistreatment of trans people who are incarcerated. What actionable things will your office do to hold these groups accountable? Because accountability could mean anything these days. Is it talking ill of them? Is it defunding them? Is it suing even? So I just want to hear a little bit more about what are the tangible levels of accountability that your office is willing to use. And who did we start with last time? Sorry. Should we start with Kara?
Sure. And Amy, you mentioned filing suit. I'm no stranger to filing suit against the city of St. Louis, but when the city abused our tax dollars and awarded them to a billionaire instead of to the communities that pay into the system, I filed suit against the city of St. Louis and the St. Louis Blues for an egregious abuse of tax dollars, and I almost won. Of course, there was a change in federal law and we had to leave that lawsuit. But the point is, you're absolutely right. Accountability measures are incredibly important. When it comes to the police and that accountability, part of the crime plan that I have proposed includes very clear articulation of the reverence of life in a use of force policies and a commitment to mandating the transparency of all use of force investigations, period. And I'll also be insisting upon the creation of an Office of Equity and Inclusion that would be regularly being held accountable for hiring practices, ongoing training and evaluation, and reporting to the general public. And lastly, that communication policy with the general public that is currently missing from within our police department, and regular reporting on any citizen complaints going into and surrounding our police department. But we cannot build a better, safer community without trust between our community, the police department, and the police department's employer, which is the city of St. Louis. We cannot move forward without establishing trust. It's impossible. So that has to be at the heart of all of our decisions, and it would be if I was mayor.
So in regards to the council that you mentioned, would the council have any legal powers within themselves, or is this just a council that would then report to the mayor's office?
The Office of Equity and Inclusion?
Yes.
The question is, would it report to the mayor's office?
Or would it have powers intrinsic to the organization?
I would insist upon the police department adopting this internally and also being answering to the mayor's office. So this person, in my view, would oversee the department policies and processes and recruitment, hiring, promotions, disciplinary issues, training, and things of that nature, and be not only accountable to the mayor, but to the general public through reporting on these issues. This is not uncommon for cities to insist upon within their police department. This type of reporting and accountability is a key component to more successful approaches to public safety, which includes building trust and being accountable to the general public as a key component.
And then to Shara, so the actual steps of accountability that your office would take in these kind of situations, just as a refresher for the idea of the question.
Yeah, and I believe you're also talking about police officers and those that work in our jails. Look, another part of that report, the Teneo report of our police department indicated something really serious that I think we need to take care of, which is the collective bargaining agreement and how it usurps the ability of the police department to hold its officers accountable for disciplinary procedures. We need to take a look at both of those, the disciplinary procedures within the department, as well as the CBA. And I would renegotiate the CBA to make sure that we have a way to hold officers accountable for bad outcomes, for like the killing of kiwi herring, for example. And we need to make sure that we have a clear line of accountability. And as mayor, I would do that. And then also, you know, the CBA is typically negotiated behind closed doors. I would put sunlight on that entire process. These are your tax dollars and you deserve to know how they're being spent, as well as we work for you. And so you deserve to know, you know, what our policies and procedures are when it comes to disciplinary action. And so there are clear problems between the collective bargaining agreement and the police department's current disciplinary actions that prevent any sort of accountability. And we need to erase those lines and make sure that there are clear lines for holding officers accountable for bad outcomes.
And you brought up the name Kiwi Herring, who was killed by St. Louis Police Department in 2017. That begs the question of, would you be willing to utilize the mayor's office to call for a third-party investigation into her death?
Yeah, absolutely.
Kara?
Absolutely. We need to have third-party investigations to look into all uses of force in the police department, and certainly when a loss of life takes place.
Last question that I have, it's kind of a long one, but please bear with me. The queer community and queer communities all across the country have a unique and nuanced relationship with the issue of gentrification. We in St. Louis can see aspects of gentrification cropping up all over, but primarily you can really see it very well in the Grove. Whether it is luxury housing coming in and driving up the general cost of rent, or the shutdowns of local businesses along streets and being replaced with other types of businesses that don't exactly cater to the same clientele. With your role as mayor, would you be willing to take certain stances against gentrification? What would those stances, or what would those efforts look like? And would you be willing to call for like a moratorium on developments of luxury housing in favor of creating more affordable housing throughout St. Louis, or even other types of rent control policies?
Yeah, so
And we'll start with Tishara, yes.
oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
No, you're fine.
So gentrification also affects the Black community as well, because we get pushed out of neighborhoods, and nowhere is that more prevalent than the Central West End. When we saw 50% of African Americans leave the West End when all of a sudden the prices went up. So there are several things that I think we need to do. Inclusionary zoning is one of them. When a new luxury development comes, or a new development period comes, to set aside a percentage of those new units for affordable housing. Connecting community benefit agreements also to all developments that get our tax dollars. And in those community benefit agreements, you could include inclusionary zoning, you can include non-discriminatory practices, tenants' bill of rights, a whole host of things, but that's negotiated with the community, right? And then also on the gentrification end, when we look at how it pushes out Black families from neighborhoods, there have been cities that have taken a tax freeze, for example, that have frozen property taxes in neighborhoods that gentrify. So that does a couple of things. So that families who were there can participate in the wealth building that happens in those neighborhoods when the tax rolls improve, but they're also not taxed out. So the taxes don't become so expensive that they can't afford to stay there anymore. And so there are a myriad of things that we can do to make sure that as neighborhoods start to gentrify, because we know that that's going to happen, unfortunately, but we have to protect the people who are currently living there, as well as provide more affordable options for people to live there. Because I'm sure that the cafeteria workers and the janitors that work at Barnes Jewish want to live closer to the hospital instead of taking a 2-hour bus ride or wherever they're coming from to get to work every day. And then for those developments that don't want to do inclusionary zoning, then we'll have them pay more. And then we can put that into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which will then allow us to build more affordable housing in other places in the city.
Kara?
Gentrification is such an important issue, and it's one that hits home for me. The ward I represent is in seeing development. And so the approach I've taken here in the 20th Ward is one I will take citywide. So for example, we have some market rate development, some new construction that's taking place in the Graveway Park neighborhood for the first time in decades. And this is a good thing, because we've had vacancy and other and decrepit buildings for far too long. But in order to make sure that the community continues to look like the community that currently lives here, we've woven in on the same block of some of this market rate development, rehousing for our unhoused population, a development of almost equal size and almost equal investment, to ensure that, for example, there's a diversity of income on that same block. We will continue to do that same, weaving those in with each other, market rate and affordable housing, so that we have a long-term solution that continues to look like the diversity of the the city as a whole is an important piece here. But we have to address the vacancy. We recognize that in many parts of North St. Louis, we're seeing depopulation, but yet we have people who work for the city of St. Louis that have very reliable jobs and are unable to get access to the financing they need to purchase a very reasonable house. And so working with our banks to make sure that folks of modest means have access not just to housing, but to home ownership. The idea that the treasurer put forward of freezing taxes is a really good one. Unfortunately, we are preempted by state law for doing something like that, but we could put in a tax deferral program, which would allow folks a vacation, so to speak, from paying those taxes while those property values are increasing, allowing folks who are homeowners to stay in the homes. And I think those are some issues that both of us would support in that office.
One more question off of those. The Board of Aldermen has a unique relationship with developers, and often there has been some controversy with the ways that TIFs and blighting has been used to cut certain types of sweetheart deals and allow for developers to be able to do things that would benefit them, maybe more so than their communities. Do you have anything that you would like to say about TIFs and blighting throughout the city of St. Louis?
I can start, I suppose. Sure, absolutely. As a member of that somewhat dysfunctional body of legislators, I mean that with endearment to many of my colleagues down there, all of them actually. But what I'll say is that we have become a very reactionary form of government when it comes to development. So in other words, instead of moving forward development proactively, we just answer to developers, and it's very dysfunctional. Most modern cities are proactive in identifying projects of development that they want to see and issuing RFPs and letting the developers come to the table and fill the needs of the citizens. And as mayor, I will reorient the way in which we do development to be proactive. And that way we can identify that, look, this neighborhood needs a grocery store, and we're going to issue an RFP to make sure that we get one. And we're not going to just answer to the whims of our developer community. I have been part of the new wave of progressive aldermen who push back. As I mentioned earlier, when we gave away $108 million, I not only opposed it, but sued the city to get those tax dollars back and put them into the hands of our communities. This is an incredibly important piece of the puzzle here to reorient our development into better serving our citizens. And that means leading and not being responsive to whatever the whims of the developer community are.
And Tashara.
Yeah, since 2000, the city has given away over $700 million in TIFs and tax abatements. We've been giving it out like Halloween candy and at the peril of our school district. 60% of our property taxes are supposed to fund our schools. So you do the math of 60% of 700 million and you see how much our school districts have lost and how we are expecting our schools to do more with less. The mayor has to be intentional about investment as well as being intentional about tax abatements and TIFs. This tool is supposed to be used if the project would not happen but for the TIF or tax abatement. And a lot of times we have just given it away and have blighted sidewalks, for example, in order to qualify for a TIF. Like there are 50% or more Well, the recent audit by Nicole Galloway showed that 50% of the TIFs given away in the city of St. Louis are in 4 wards, and they're all in the central corridor. It's up to the mayor to be intentional about investment in communities that have not been invested in decades. Communities like mine, because I live north of Del Mar. I'm the only mayoral candidate that lives north of Del Mar and spent most of my life north of Del Mar. So, and I cry when I visit my old stomping grounds and places I used to play as a kid, because those neighborhoods, many of my family have even moved out of them. So how do we make intentional investment in North St. Louis and parts of South St. Louis that haven't seen any investment in decades, and return those communities to the bright communities, family welcoming communities that they used to be, as well as we stop giving away our children's money, which is what we do every time we do that, to rich and wealthy developers, and make sure we get something in return, and having the city as an active partner in development, not a passive partner.
All right, fantastic. That's all the questions that I have.
All right, well, I got a couple more for you. Hold up. Okay, so one question that we got from the comments is, a lot of people have expressed the difficulties it is for trans people to change their names in the city of St. Louis compared to the counties. How would you work with the judiciary system in the city of St. Louis to make changing of names for trans folk more accessible?
I think that's well, to me, it seems a pretty easy. Let's see what the county is doing and see how we can translate that into the city's processes. There are a lot of times where I have seen things that have worked in other places and other cities, brought that to St. Louis and tweaked it for our environment and let it roll. So where it's working, let's bring it to St. Louis. Let's have a conversation with our judges and our judicial circuit, and see how we can make that process easier for our queer plus community.
I'll agree with the treasurer on this one. I think looking to other cities and other communities, I think we also have a cost barrier in the city of St. Louis. And so recording that deed, recording your change in name, excuse me, does have a significant cost here. And so looking for ways to reduce that and make sure that it's not a burden that can't be borne by those who just want to change their name and change their identification and with the city of St. Louis. I think there's ways we can break those barriers down.
Wonderful. And we're literally getting so many questions now. People are like, I want a question. So how can people contact you? How can people get involved with your campaign? How can people ask you questions? Because, you know, this isn't all the questions of the queer community. We're just two people trying to do what we can.
Yeah, so on our website, Tashara4mayor.com, we have a comment section where, which is, I think is on our platform. And you can take a look at our platform. You can let us know what you like, what you don't like, and send us a note with your email address and phone number, and we will contact you back. I'm available on all forms of social media because I have a funny name. It was easy to find my name on all the forms. So I'm at Tishaura, Tishaura, on Facebook and Twitter, I believe, and Instagram.
My website is Cara with a C, C-A-R-A, the number 4, or excuse me, Cara Spencer, the number 4 mayor.com. And you can also reach out. We have a Facebook page, caraspencerformayor.com, a Twitter, Instagram, etc. And we're checking all those channels. So we are happy to hear from folks in any way that is most comfortable to reach out with. We're also located on Cherokee at Jefferson. So if you want to stick something in our mail slot or just stop by, we're there most days.
And just a follow up on that, is that a good place for people who want to get involved with your campaigns to sign up and volunteer?
Absolutely.
Yes, there's a sign up on the website for people to volunteer.
And, you know, for friends, are y'all hiring right now?
We are hiring canvassers. We pay $17 an hour.
We have a few slots for different positions, canvassing from, you know, we've got a few openings in different departments, but that's not my line of I don't have the figures in front of me, so please check in, but we do have some openings right now, absolutely.
Wonderful. And the closing statement, what can queer and trans people expect from you as a mayor?
Who goes first?
I think the last question was started by Kara, so we can start with Tashara.
So what can the Queer Plus community expect from me? You can expect a leader who will listen. You can expect a leader who's going to give you a seat at the table, and you can expect a leader that's going to act on your concerns. And I'll be the first to tell you that I don't know everything, and I'm open to learn. Please know that as a Black woman, I have also experienced oppression and discrimination. So there's a huge possibility that I'll be able to understand a lot of the issues that the Queer Plus community has experienced. So would love to continue to work with you as I have over the last several years. So thank you again, Maxie, for putting this together. This was a great conversation.
And Kara.
Well, thank you both. Thank you, Maxie. Thank you, Amy. Thanks for everyone who's tuning in from home, from wherever you may be, for asking some really tough and important questions here. I mentioned on the front end that I consider myself a friend and an ally to the queer community. And as an ally, the first thing, I think maybe perhaps the most important thing to do is to be present and to listen. I am honored to be here, to be invited to hear the concerns and share my thoughts with the queer community and the ally community. I'll point out again that, you know, Tashara Jones and Kara Spencer are both here as allies and friends of the queer community. And that's a great honor for us both to share here with you tonight. If elected as mayor, I know that I won't walk in the door with all the answers. But I will continue to show up. I will continue to be present, and I will continue to be a friend and an ally to the queer community.
All right, thank you guys so much for coming out tonight. Thank you everybody who is watching and is commenting in the chat. We really appreciate the engagement. And of course, thank you to the ever glamorous Maxie Glamour. For pulling all of this together. A saint and a scholar, more of a demon, but we love them regardless.
Thank you. And thank you, Amy, for being here. If it weren't for you, we couldn't have done this. I'm horrible at keeping time, so you made this wonderful. And thank you both, Kara and Tashara. And for all of you voters at home, we've got two amazing women running for office. There's no need to vote for one of those men. And on that note, thank you very much and good night.
Thank you.